feel like I haven't done a public video in a long time. I haven't.
You haven't done a public video in a long time. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the limelights.
Literally. My eyes.
Well, what are we here to talk about today, my dear?
We're going to talk about reconciliation. It feels like that is a major theme for my life right now, our collective 2020, humanity is attempting and in the process to reconcile with ourselves and with each other and with our humanity, our wholeness, our trust.
And there's reconciling on the table and needed right now between Black folks and white folks in America, with our Americans with our history, all Americans with our history. There's reconciliation that's needing in these splits in the political sphere right now, in literally the paradigms, the sort of paradigms that are not connected, that are not reconciled right now, this like right and left thing. And the splits that are happening even in our own communities as people sort of show up as having a side, so to speak, in some of these issues. And not to mention the Me Too movement, the reconciliation between masculine and feminine, which is a larger sort of arc that this all can be seen as kind of different metaphors for, different embodiments of. Right?
Yeah, the continual coming out of, sexual violation allegations, and the continual kind of reconciliation between men and women. And then we have our own personal theme of reconciliation that Joshua and I have been working through, moving through, reconciling through.
Since the very beginning of our relationship.
Since the beginning.
And as we were preparing for this, we actually wanted to look up the word reconciliation. It comes from the Latin roots re, which means back, and conciliare, which means to bring together. So reconciliation means to bring back together, right? And what is it that we're bringing back together? Well, it depends on the situation. Two human beings, right? Healing is reconciliation. Healing, literally, if I cut my skin open, it is a reconciliation, a bringing back together of my skin, right? My inner healing journey has been a reconciliation within myself, with parts of myself that I had cut off, or that I had somehow dissociated from, or somehow let take too much power within me, right?
Yeah, and as a collective, as a community, as a one race of humanity, we are reconciling, bringing back these parts of ourselves, the shadows and the light, the good and the bad, to come into more wholeness. And that's what healing really is reconciliation, is wholeness, is that coming back together into alignment, into unity, into connection and trust.
That's right, trust and connection. It's a restoring of trust and connection. And the thing about the most powerful kinds of reconciliation is that, in a sense, the back part doesn't totally land with me, because it brings us together forward. It brings us forward together, not back together. In fact, there's no back together, right? What happens is we're in this dialectical synthesis that brings us forward together when we can repair the fabric of trust and connection at a whole new level.
Yeah, but those back parts, those past parts, those other timelines can actually come forward together. So we're bringing what is back forward into the here and now, the alignment.
It reminds me of the word tantra, which is to weave, right? We're literally weaving. It is a tantra. It is a weaving of the fabric of reality, right? Back together. And like we said, our relationship started, ironically, interestingly, with a conversation about reconciliation, with an experience of boundary crossing.
That I had with somebody else. And then we had a conversation about doing a Facebook Live, because it was kind of the height of the hashtag Me Too, movement that was moving. And
it is moving.
That is moving.
It is still moving, y'all.
Yeah. And so our first conversation was around reconciliation and empathy. And
the difference between a man reacting and denying the experience of the feminine when she brings forward a sense of impact and pain, a sense of violation, instead of the shadow masculine diminishing and defending and avoiding and denying and projecting, right? It was a listening and a receiving, a letting myself take in her experience. So I role played this man first in the shadow aspect and what that's looked like for so many women, and then I embodied him as the most grounded, kingly, centered, empathetic man who could possibly respond to her in that situation.
Yeah. And so our journey began with reconciliation, and it ended with reconciliation.
Yeah.
And we have risen and will continue to kind of rise forward through the ashes of our reconciliation. And within our reconciliation, there's been reconciliation within individually. So much initiation and healing has arose.
Greater wholeness within each of us, right? We're reconciling within because it's a big hologram, right? It's just as within, so without. As within, so between. As between, so beyond, right? Everything is a reflection from the farthest out to the deepest in of the same essential unity, the same essential nature, the same essential process that we're in. And, I'm really proud of us for choosing reconciliation when there were so many other options.
Yeah, and it's a hard choice to choose it, and it's for me it feels like it's a choosing it again and again. It's a coming back. It's a remembering what one stands for, what we choose to align ourselves with. It's a principle.
It's a commitment we make in our lives.
To continually come back to reconciliation. And there's moments for us, and we look at the world, and we can all look at our lives, even if it's just a conversation, an argument that we're in on Facebook with somebody about their different views. There are continual moments of choice that can feel really hard in that moment to come back to reconciliation.
Well, let's talk about what blocks reconciliation. Before we get into all the juicy stuff that we've learned about what actually promotes it and creates it, let's talk about what blocks it, because I think it's really relatable on every level. Like, I do a thing, you have an ouch. We're in this situation. What blocks us from reconciling around that, right? First thing is projections, right? My story's about you. You're too sensitive. You're making stuff up. You're emotional.
You don't care.
Yeah. You're manipulating me with your emotions, right? What other projections might you have toward me?
You find loopholes and boundaries.
Yeah. I don't care about you. I am I'm just trying to get what I want from you without any kind of care about your humanity, right? So many projections, right? And to the extent, of course they're going to happen, but to the extent that I keep investing in being right about that, I block reconciliation from happening.
Right.
And that is a form of defensiveness, right? It's defending myself. It's reacting to this other person.
Avoidance and disassociation.
Yeah.
So,
what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Gaslighting, right?
That never happened.
Yeah.
That is a huge block to reconciliation, is when we're avoiding. She might avoid reconciliation by not talking about her ouch, right?
Right.
So many women are avoiding the conflict of reconciliation by not talking about their ouch. I might use avoidance and dissociation by just denying that anything is there. You're just being such and such, right? Like, that wasn't that big a deal. It didn't happen that way, right? And those are two different things. It wasn't that big a deal and that didn't happen are two whole different levels of blockade in the reconciliation process, right? Denial, complete denial that anything happened. We have a president who does this again and again and again right now. Total denial when all of the facts point to a very simple truth, right? It's impossible to reconcile with somebody who will not own and acknowledge their behavior and the impact that it had on another person.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just like feeling and seeing how, this is happening so big, in such a big way, around the race conversation and around Black Lives Matter, right? And that like denial, how deeply detrimental and impactful that is, that inability to just acknowledge the pain that is here, to acknowledge what is happening still, to acknowledge what has happened and that impact, when we can't even simply acknowledge that, and we're in that space of it was how many years ago, well, this happens to me, or whatever it is. There's just a denial and an avoidance and a dismissal, and without that acknowledgement, there cannot be a full reconciliation.
No way. Our realities don't fit together, right? They just don't fit together. And that's a crucial point of contact in this very subjective universe that we exist in. Crucial point of contact is to at least agree on what was said and what was done, what happened, right? And it is so easy. I want to say ouch doesn't go away. You can avoid talking about the ouch for as long as you can hold on to it, right? But it's not going anywhere. It doesn't just disappear. It just goes under the surface and adds to a sense of inner pressure, right? It just adds to a sense of inner pressure that is bound to pop at some point.
Right, and comes out in all of these other little passive, aggressive, unconscious ways. Yeah.
Or an explosion, right? Suddenly the pressure is so much, I've held in so much that boom, I explode, and it comes out in violence, verbal, emotional, or physical violence, right?
Yeah. So what else blocks reconciliation?
Enemy images.
Enemy images.
It's a form of projection, but it's basically when I make you a caricature, an object, instead of a full human being who is responding to universal human needs, who is doing her best at any given moment with the resources she has available. And instead, I caricature you as a hysterical woman, or I just fill in the blank. Any label will do as a caricature of what you are, and as my enemy, and as a threat to me, right?
Yeah.
I dehumanize you with my projections, what I tell myself about who and what you are.
Yeah.
Right?
We have so much of that happening right now in the world with each other. And in our process, that definitely came out for me, where I was still I was really reconciling with who you were and the experience that I had with you, and couldn't quite like make them reconcile together. And so for a part of my process, especially when we were apart, I was really like reconciling with that enemy image that I had of you, and that was painful for me. I'm sure I know it was painful for you and had an impact, but it was painful for me to feel like this person that I know, that I experienced as this, is maybe not that, and is this instead. And it's deeply impactful for both, for all. When we lose that sense of like goodness and humanity in our experience or projection of one another, which is a huge piece that we're just reconciling with as a collective, as humans, reconciling with our own benevolence. Like, can we truly trust our goodness? Can we truly trust humans? Well, we look around and, you know, the misuse of power and the destruction and the abuse and the oppression and all of it is just like, how can we trust our goodness and our benevolence over there and then also here? And that's what we're really reconciling with.
And it's impossible to dissolve an enemy image when you're identified with your resentment. When you're identified with a righteous sense of resentment for being wronged.
Right. Which was a big piece that I had to reconcile with. And we've been through many phases of reconciling that. I think both of us.
Yeah, we both had that. We both had that sense of being wronged in a certain way. We both had that sense of like, this person is not the person I thought they were, right? And we've both had to soften so many times around the hardness in the belly that comes up when you are hurting, when it hurts, you know? When you're scared and you're angry and afraid and resentful.
Yeah, and really the hurt and all of that underneath is the grief.
Yes.
And the grief is connected to the love as well. And you know, we took a month apart of no communication, and then we took another month because I needed it. I wasn't ready to talk. At that point, I was like, I don't think I ever want to talk to you again. And I needed to take another 3-4 weeks to really continue to reconcile with that resentment and that hurt. And when I did a huge kind of process, ceremony, womb release, and that resentment and that enemy image kind of dissolved, and it was like the grief, which I was definitely feeling, but in a way that resentment was protecting me from another deeper layer of that grief, and then was really protecting me from feeling the love that I could not stop feeling.
And I think you named the first essential component of reconciliation that we can talk about here, which is a capacity and a willingness to grieve, a capacity to let your resentment and the hardness soften and transmute into the grief around the sense of loss. Like what really hurts the most is the tremendous sense of loss. And so it's grieving, whether it's a loss of some fantasy of what you thought was true, whether it's a loss of a partner in a relationship, whether it's a sense of the loss of millions of people to genocide, or to the loss of a culture and people's names through exploiting them through slavery for hundreds of years. We're not talking about 2 or 3 generations, right? We have to be willing to feel that grief. We have to be willing to drop the defensiveness of resentment and denial in order to feel through all of it. And nobody wants to feel that. But the irony is that it is one of the most cleansing, poignantly beautiful experiences I have ever had. Grief is such a dear friend, such a dear friend now in my life.
Reconciling with our grief, with our our ability and the beauty and the humanity of deep, deep feeling.
And of course, a fundamentally essential component of reconciliation is the willingness, and I would say the commitment to reconcile. Right? We live in a throwaway culture. We live in a throwaway culture where like something doesn't work for us, we fucking throw it away and go buy another one, right? We don't stay with things. We haven't learned how to like stay with things and fix them because they're valuable, right? We literally throw things away that are tremendously valuable all the time in our culture.
Yeah.
So we come from this like a sense of excess and waste. We don't have a sense on so many fundamental levels of what it means to really commit ourselves to taking care.
Right. And yeah, and sticking through and going through a process. And that said, there needs to be a level of that coming from both parties or all parties. Otherwise, you can't really reconcile if there's a party that is not on board with that commitment.
Totally.
That we are in the process of reconciling, even when we're mad at each other and don't know how we're going to make it through that path back together.
Yeah.
Back even just into like respect for each other.
And this brings up to like a choice point here. One of them is that I don't want to be heard for suggesting that you like dog for your needs to reconcile with somebody who's been like abusive.
Yes, exactly.
Right? There is a really healthy way of reconciling with oneself by never allowing another human being into your field again.
Yes, yeah.
Just setting a fucking boundary and guarding that boundary in whatever way you need to make sure that that person never comes back into your life. That is a fully legitimate thing to do to reconcile with yourself in circumstances. We're not suggesting that that's not a valid option. We're talking about when there is a desire, when there is a sense of there was something here that I missed. There is a sense of shared responsibility for what broke down. Yeah. And a willingness to and some innate desire, some arrow of desire toward this person, like you matter to me.
Yeah, you matter. I want to reconcile with you, even if that means like we're not gonna be hanging out every day or in each other's lives in a big way. But there's a reconciliation. It could mean that we never talk again. Yeah, and that was that has been part of our journey of like going apart and then coming back together and not knowing what that back together was going to look like, but knowing that there was more to reconcile and there was a desire and a commitment for both of us, and a really like staying with the process and being sober about like this reconciliation may just be us coming back into like humanity and respect and care, and then like closing that door on that relationship.
Yeah. And I want to say that even when we first broke up, we broke up already in a process of reconciliation. Yeah. Even when we were in, asked our community to hold a ceremony, a death rites circle for our relationship, which they did so magnificently.
Yeah.
We were in a process of reconciling with each other's humanity. We were unwilling to walk away from a love that was so powerful and so meaningful on so many levels, dehumanizing the other person, walk away with an enemy image. We may walk away feeling clear that you're not my person and maybe we're not really community.
Yeah, and we may still have hurt and all of those things, but there's a fundamentally respecting each other's humanity. Yeah. So we had uncoupling counseling that month when we broke up, and then this really powerful hours-long death rites circle with our community holding space for us, and just powerful. We need more and more of this in our communities, I wholly believe.
Yeah, and if you're curious about a death rites ritual for your relationship, some sort of transition ritual, please let us know. We would love to share what we've experienced and point you in a direction. It really is something we're learning how to put together right now as a community, because we're learning how to stay human with each other, right? This is one of the technologies that's emerging in a culture that's committed to reconciliation and interdependence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we need it on all of the levels. We need us to come together in these reconciliation circles for the, the ongoing sexual violation accusations that are coming out within our communities. We need to truly come together and do this for our Black and Indigenous brothers and sisters. We need to come together in these reconciliation circles.
Yeah,
and be committed.
Yeah, and so we get to be bad at it until we're good at it. And that's how we get good at things. Is we be bad at them for a while and we stay with it, right? So here we are blundering our way imperfectly, individually, as a couple, as a community, as a nation, as a globe, blundering our way toward more elegant tools for reconciliation and a greater clarity of consciousness around its meaningfulness and its power, right? And why we would do it.
Yeah.
And so there are a few other essential parts of the process, right? There's truth-telling, radical truth-telling, radical honesty, right? Telling the truth about what happened, telling the truth about how you feel, telling the truth even about what you think about that person, right? Within a container, of course. Yeah. But really understanding it's a truth-telling process. And anything you withhold, anything you push aside from that process, it doesn't go away. Yeah. It doesn't go away. So you've got to be willing to bring all of it, all the ugly and all of it has to get on the table.
Yeah. And empathy. Empathy, truly bringing that commitment again to listening for that person's experience, and truly bringing curiosity to understand that person's experience or that impact, or how your behavior unconsciously or consciously has had an impact, and just simply what that person's experience is. Yeah. Being willing to hear it and get it without making it about you, which is definitely a huge work in progress. Yeah. Continuing for me to refine that.
Yeah, really deeply getting another human being.
Yeah, right? Without your own stuff.
It rehumanizes people. Empathy is the thing that rehumanizes people and dissolves the enemy image of them. Yeah. Right? It dissolves it. And when we dissolve the enemy image, we've actually made forgiveness obsolete. Forgiveness is just a way of rehumanizing somebody, of saying, I see that you were doing your best with the limited resources you had at that time. I see that if I was you, I would have done the exact same thing you did, right? And that it's okay to acknowledge your best sucked at that point. Your best was horrible and it hurt, right? But it was your best at that time. And we're in this process of walking each other home, often by bringing up our greatest fear and our greatest sort of trauma and wounding, because all of that trauma and wounding was embedded in us within our primary bonding, within our primary relationships. Yeah. And so when we become intimate, when we begin to trust, we open all of that up.
All our relational trauma comes up, yeah. And so it is so crucial, fundamental to the reconciliation process for us to bring our capacity to own, to be accountable, and even make amends and reparations where we can, right? To fully do that deep mining within our own recesses of our shadow, the unowned parts, the blind spots. To be willing to see and shine a light in those places and go, okay, I can take ownership for this. And that's been a huge part of ours, and so many layers of it, and so many layers of, you owning things and me owning things, and us being able to receive it on a level, and then needing to own the things on a deeper level for each other to be able to receive it on a deeper level, to let those layers truly be penetrated with in the ownership and also in the receiving of that ownership and that accountability.
Yeah.
And
truly.
that is what has truly built trust.
Yes.
Like when you and I can see and look in those places and take ownership for the impact.
Yep.
Which is often like an unconscious, right? It's been an unconscious thing. It's been literally a blind spot inside. It wasn't like intentional trying to hurt each other.
It was a blind spot.
Yeah.
And we have them. And we have to be willing to look into them and take ownership of the things we did unconsciously. Right? You have to, this is one of the hardest things in the world to do. We have these ways of excusing behaviors, like, oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
And I come from a world where we don't forget anything. We sometimes unconsciously choose not to attend to something. But we didn't forget, right? We are either making conscious or unconscious choices. And when we can go back and take full fucking responsibility for our unconscious choices, because we see the impact of those choices, it is excruciating. It is definitely a befriending of shame. You have to be willing to befriend your shame, to not be turned into a worthless piece of shit because you see things about yourself that you hadn't seen before. You see motivations and unconscious behaviors that you hadn't seen before. You have to be willing to then love that.
Right. You see all the places that you still have to grow and become conscious, awake, aware. Yeah.
And that's rehumanizing yourself. That's the process of reconciling with you. Is that process of looking in and owning. Because only when we fully own and take responsibility for our actions and our impact will we ever truly embody the greatest power that we are here to transmit in the world. Truly. So that's such a crucial piece.
Yeah.
Is ownership.
And that repetition and consistency of that commitment of owning. And you know, for us, again, so many different layers and levels of reconciliation has occurred and will continue to happen. And
for me, there's a couple of layers in here that I want to bring forth. One of them is that a part of this is about accountability. Being accountable to what we've done, right? Which is also being accountable to a set of values. That if I value honesty and I've lied, I have to be accountable to that, not just to the impact on my partner, but to the state of brokenness of my integrity to that degree. And my integrity stays broken as long as I can't own it and be accountable for it.
Right.
The moment I own it and become accountable for it and say, oh, how can I make it better? Then my integrity is on the path to being restored, and our relationship is on the path to being restored, right? And
that accountability is like an action, right? It's
an action.
Forward moving, building thing. It's not just an apology.
Yeah.
Right?
If the ouch is that I broke your car window, right? Just admitting that I did it is not enough. I have to fucking get you a new car window. I have to ideally like place the order and make it as easy on you as possible, right? And so that's just a simple way of saying like we repair and we do reparations, right? Accountability means reparations. It means if I damaged you or took something from you, that I replace it, right? To the extent that that's possible. And that comes through financial remuneration, that can come through paying for somebody getting trauma services, counseling, paying for medication for somebody. It could be so many different kinds of things. We use the resources we have to support this person in healing or in restoring what was broken in them by the act.
Yeah.
So those are some of the essential components of this process. And it's one thing to be able to say the words when you have the insight, you know, like, oh, really? Oh, I did that, you know? I did that. And it's another thing to feel it, like, fuck. Oh, I did that. And acknowledge that. And our counselor, Jamie, was incredible in this way. We found her after we'd broken up. We've often sort of mourned that we didn't find her sooner. But we found her
the week that we were breaking up,
and she would do this thing, and this will take us into some of the tools that we use in the reconciliation process. But she would make it very clear whose turn it was to express themselves and to say all the things they needed to say. And she would kind of be like either literally physically like holding the back of the person who was the one listening and receiving. She would just be holding that person so that it was extra resource for them to be able to take in what this other person was saying, right? And she would hold us and she would facilitate a dialogue. And so the one who was in the seat of the expressor would say a big piece like, oh, this. And then she would slow us down and she would be like, okay, what can you reflect back, right? And so I would, if I was listening, I would reflect back what I heard from Lily about what she shared about her experience. Then she would say, and what can you authentically own about that? What can you own, right? And that is so crucial. It's not enough to reflect back somebody else's experience. The question is, what can you own about that, right? How and that was hard. It took some fucking rounds.
Piece. Yeah, but that's like the piece that really matters, because I would say to you, you know, you're hearing my words, you're reflecting back my words, but I don't feel you feeling me and getting it. And then that piece of like, what can you own? It's like it makes you really have to search. And it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's so fucking impactful and valuable.
And it goes both ways, right? And it's no easier for the person who is the perpetrator in this scenario to take ownership than it is for the person who's the victim in the scenario to take ownership. Yeah. Both people have to own all of it. Yeah. All of it. And that is really scary. It's really dicey. It requires support and it requires these tools. And our number one tool through this process.
Take 5 breaths.
That's one.
I've had to do many of those when we are in a reconciliation process moment, or we might say an argument, or you know, just noticing in our lives on social media. We can do this in any moment. We have an agreement to take those 5 deep breaths, and so any one of us can say when we're noticing we're triggered, or we're getting at capacity, or we're feeling like we're not getting anywhere, we can say, will you take 5 breaths with me? And we are committed to doing that.
And never saying no.
Yes.
Right. And man, those 5 breaths can feel like an eternity. Right around after breath 3, I'm usually like, okay, I'm good, you know? But then it's actually those last 2 breaths that drop me in past that point of wiggliness, right? And it is so essential to come back to that place of resourcedness, of softening and slowing down. And I promise you, there is almost never in your life going to be something so urgent and something so important that you can't take 5 deep breaths before you decide, or before you open your fucking mouth.
Yeah, it's going to be so much better if we could all implement that and practice that, even on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And especially on social media.
Oh my God.
And in our intimate relationships.
Yes.
And just everything. The other tool that is so important, we kind of touched on it, is reflective listening. And this is another thing that we can really do on social media, that just even in the last days and weeks for me, that I've been like reminding myself and doing the best I can to come back when I'm having conversations that feel like tense with people on social media, is even reflecting of listening in writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I hear this, right? I hear
Is it
you
like
said,
this for you?
yeah, this and this and this. And that's literally like hearing somebody and repeating back what you heard them say.
Mm-hmm.
To see if you heard that right. And it helps both. It helps you as the listener to like really listen and get it before you just jump in and respond with what you want to say. And it also helps them feel like you're hearing, and it also can then help them to reflect on what they said and like, wow, did I really want to say that or mean it in that way?
Yes. And it also exposes the corruptions in translation.
Right.
It exposes where if I add something that wasn't there or misreflect something, you can say, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted to be heard for. Let me try again.
Right.
And you can say it another way that I can maybe receive.
Yeah.
Right. And so and so much of our like the conflict we drag around and the stuff that doesn't get resolved, or the conflicts that just blow us out for stupid reasons, are about a corruption in translation.
Yeah.
Right.
And that brings us to know your seat. Know when you are in the seat and choose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's not, again, social media, or you haven't really set up the container for it, choose yourself and know what seat you're in. Are you in the seat of the listener, or are you in the seat of the one who is expressing?
Mm-hmm. And if you're in the seat of the listener, it's one thing to be able to reflect back what they've said. It's another thing to be able to cultivate this art of empathy. And all of these tools are things that you can practice, right? Nobody expects somebody to be good at something in the big game if they haven't practiced it, right? And so we get to actually take on the responsibility for and the commitment to practicing these very specific communication and interpersonal intimacy tools, right? And the art of empathy is one of them. And that's not just reflecting the content, the story. It's reflecting the needs and the feelings that are underneath that.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're feeling really angry because you're needing some support and you're wanting to be seen right now, right? And that it just carves away all the right and wrong. I can totally disagree with her conclusions about a set of my behaviors, right? I can't disagree about how she feels and about the needs really that are underneath that, right? And that can be acknowledged no matter what. And it's a powerful art to cultivate if we want to live in a reconciled world, in reconciled and intimate relationships. We take 5 breaths multiple times every week. Whenever there's a sense of charge building, we at the very least reflectively listen. And then sometimes if the charge doesn't go away, we might pause and take 5 breaths together. One of us will bring that up. And so these 2 things have been essential. And then the third thing that's related to that is creating a container, right? Knowing your seat is part of a container, right? But it's one thing, it's one thing for her to just come to me while I'm doing the dishes and like, blah, like say like her ouch at me. I'm not even really like fully present, right? And I'm like, oh. And so I might be able to reflect back to her in that moment. But many times through this process, because she's the sensitive one and I'm the avoidant one, right? And so she feels more, and it's like, it's more in her body and her system. But I have to be able to recognize when I'm ready and capable of having an intimate, present conversation with her. And there have been many times when I've said, honey, I don't feel like I can have this conversation right now. Can we talk about this and set some time aside for it later tonight?
Yeah.
Right? And that creates a container around what we've done so that we're coming to that conversation resourced and intentional.
Yeah.
And that's really crucial.
Yeah. And, you know, occasionally in that scenario, to be able to, you know, recognize, well, more than occasionally, hopefully, but I have been able to recognize when I've just kind of blurted something at you, and then you're not able to like receive it, hold space. I didn't set a container, and to kind of go back and go, I didn't set a container. I like recognize that, and can we do that now, or do we need to do that another time, right? Yeah.
And you've gotten way better also at setting container ahead of time. Being like, I've got some charge around something and I need you to hear me.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
do you have space?
I got you. Yeah. What's up? Or I got 20 more minutes of this thing and then I'm all yours.
Yeah.
Or let's do it tonight.
Yeah.
And this is how we respect each other's autonomy. This is about respect. And one of the key sort of blockers of reconciliation is this paradox of demand energy. The paradox we're all in around demand. You cannot demand someone reconcile with you. You're not entitled to somebody reconciling with you. You're not entitled to that, right? No, nobody is. And the challenge here is that demand energy pushes people away. If there's any part of her that's coming to me with an implicit demand that I give her my attention now for this thing, I am going to either submit to her, like, oh, I don't want to be in conflict with you, so I'm going to submit to you and do what you say, and I'm going to resent it later, and it's probably not going to go well because I'm not in my center, right? Or I'm going to rebel against you and I'll be like, no, I'm not going to do that right now. No. And so when we bring demand energy around reconciliation, when we demand that somebody take responsibility for something, we are crippling them from being able to take responsibility. We're crippling them. And this is power dynamics. This is about respect. This is about the way that we deeply value our choice and autonomy and freedom as human beings. And when somebody demands something of us, even if we want on some level to give it to them, we contract.
And we want to withhold, yeah. And I've been noticing this a lot as well on the social media platforms, right? Where we are demanding of each other to listen, to hear, to get this perspective. And it's not really working. So I've been really checking myself with that as well, you know, and another tool is to take space, right? And so noticing when that demand energy is up in you or up in somebody else, to take space. And that's something we do as well. Like when that 5 breaths wasn't enough in some of those early reconciliation moments, like it was 15 minutes or whatever it was outside apart, right? Until we were ready to come back.
With a commitment to come back.
Yes.
This is the part that makes it, and it's essential for people, especially with anxious and avoidant attachment styles trying to mix together, right? Is me as the one who would need to just step away and take breaks because my nervous system wasn't having it. I would say, I promise I'll come back, and I need 20 minutes. Right? I needed to go away and be by myself and breathe and be outside and do what I needed to do to come back to my center, to come back to my place of groundedness, so that I could enter back into the conversation, right? And
it's been a huge process as a anxious attachment as well for me over the years, but noticing it in our dynamic, where like to really honor that space and get that I need that too, because the anxious like needs to work it out in that moment, otherwise it feels like something is terribly wrong. But to really like honor like his sovereignty, his need for taking space, and to get that actually serves me too. It actually serves us both, because this isn't serving us.
Yeah, and it's such a paradox. I just want to force everybody to the reconciliation table in America.
Yeah.
I just want to.
I want to demand it.
Fucking grab everybody by the ear, and the you know, the right and the left, and the men and the women,
and the spiritual and
the bypassers and the gurus and the conspiracy theorists and the anti this and the anti thaters, and just have us all just come to the table. Fuck.
Can we do that?
Oh, we could try. We would victimize them, and then it would become violence, right? We would be perpetrators. It would be forced, and it would become violence, and then we would just be feeding the cycle.
Yeah. So letting all the demand go, and allowing the sovereign choice of us all.
Yeah.
I would love for us to do that.
Yeah. And the thing is that as much as I want to see that happening out in the world, and as much as I'm committed to getting on the ground and creating spaces, as much as we're committed to creating spaces in our community for these reconciliations to happen and to be visible and to be witnessed, it starts right here. It starts right here. If you want to live in a more equitable society, if you want to live in a world where masculine and feminine are more in harmonious, mutual, adoring and honoring, then check your insides for the places where you're not right with you, and take 5 deep breaths and get really honest. Start to listen, and if you need to, call in your community, which is the last tool on the tool in the toolbox. But one of the most important, don't fucking do it alone. Call in a therapist if it's your inner work, right? And if you find inside of yourself that you that there's a relationship that remains unreconciled, there's a part of you that is like pointing energy somewhere. If you can create an opportunity for reconciliation, if you can invite them into a conversation, do it. Get support from your community. Don't do it alone. Find a third party who can be neutral, or two, you know, a third and a fourth party who can witness and hold space and conduct the space and pace the conversation. Even if you just need to write a letter to somebody you'll never talk to. There are so many ways to do the work of reconciliation without the other person there. And it is essential. So we become more reconciled collectively as each of us becomes more reconciled individually and in our 2s, 2 by 2 and 3 by 3.
I know that was one of our biggest regrets through our process and our ending of our relationship last year, and the bringing back of this reconciliation, this relationship, is the support of our community, and where we didn't get that, and where we didn't reach out for that through our process way back. And then when we did, this is where we're at. So I'm grateful that you are committed to reconciliation, to coming back together within and with each other, and to humanity, connection, and trust. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for continually showing up as you could, with a willingness to look at your own blind spots and to take ownership of the places where you gave your power away, right? And thank you for your courage to not let me off the hook for the places that I couldn't see, right? And to not totally give up on me in those moments when I couldn't see. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. Because we can only see what we see when we see it. And there's a lot of shit a lot of us don't want to see on some deep level. It's so scary. It's so scary. And so it really is about compassion. It comes back again and again to just a compassionate view of the humanity of someone else and ourselves.
And can we actually bring gratitude into this process this year, 2020, clear vision, right? clear seeing, truly taking the veils off and bringing the shadows to light. And that is what we are collectively being asked to do, so that we can truly bring all of our parts back together and move forward and create the relationships in the world that we truly desire and are capable and worthy of.
Oh, baby. There's one more piece. What is the fruits of doing this? Like, why would anybody do this? What have we experienced in our relationship as a result of our reconciliation process?
Honestly, for me, it has been a restoring of trust, like a restoring of trust in the goodness and the benevolence, and like really on a deep level, there was a huge process for me of like reconciling with God, with like the structure of this universe and of everything, you know, even beyond just you and me, like all that is, that we are reconciling with the suffering, the misuse of power, the missing each other. So it has restored a deep trust and faith
in life. Yeah. And it's brought about the most like easy, loving, gracious, tender, sexy, just so much hotness and so much passion, so much tenderness and fire. There's so much room in our relationship for all of us. And so much
more of us.
Yeah.
There's been a huge reconciling of more parts of me coming back online, more in my center, and you as well. More space for us to take up.
Totally.
Space of who we are.
And in my case, that same thing is like more alignment. Like I'm more aligned as a man in my values and my integrity than I have ever been, because I've called out another finer level of impeccability, energetic impeccability in my life.
Yeah.
And that's fucking powerful. I mean,
it's really sexy.
I think my dick grew like an inch from that experience.
My boobs got bigger.
I mean, it's fucking crazy how essential our integrity and impeccability is in terms of power. And our lovemaking has just been off the charts.
Just fruits everywhere.
So
yummy fruits. When we
fruits.
reconcile, when we stay with the really fucking painful, hard process of seeing and owning parts of us and coming back into deep recognition of each other's goodness and humanity.
It's intimacy. It's intimacy, and reconciliation doesn't just have to be for these big rifts, right? The whole elegance of our capacity to start really getting better at reconciliation is to catch it when it's little, and to be really good at micro reconciliations throughout our day, throughout our week, throughout our month, to have rhythms and rituals of reconciliation that allow us to repair the fabric as it just starts to sort of fray, instead of having to sew together a huge rip, right, after denying it and avoiding it and dissociating, right? So every level, inner, outer, everywhere, we are in a process of coming home to ourselves, to a belonging in humanity, to a belonging in community, to a belonging in connection that is a whole nother octave from what most of us have ever even experienced. It is a whole other octave of interdependence, of intimacy, of connection, and the vitality and pleasure and joy and ease and connectedness that brings about in our nervous systems and in our lives. It's such a wealth. It's a wealth beyond anything that is purchasable. You cannot buy reconciliation. You cannot buy intimacy. None of these things can be bought with money. They must be earned. They must be sought and really deeply earned. So we're here and we're ready. Let's do this. Hmm.